Chairman Corvese.
No, I think that Representative Norrie clarified what he said. I really didn't think that either one of you were on mutually exclusive pages, quite frankly. I think that what Representative Norrie was saying was that in order to judge the actions of police, be they appropriate or inappropriate, there has to be some familiarity with what goes on with regard to police training. I don't think he was saying that lay people could not be on that.
I understand that, but
I'm just going to.
what's happening is statements are being made, consciously being made, because it's your lifestyle, what you're living, what you know. But the perception being received is entirely different, because you're going to say it needs to be someone that has had the training, has had the 15 or more years experience. We have courts, we have juries that are brought in, and they rely on testimonies of witnesses, and they make decisions. Hello, they're not experts. They didn't spend 15 years or 20 years on that case. They got called in and said, here you go. So I respect it. I'm just saying the perception that's received, there are many people out there, except window dressing, which we had a window dressing that come in this and testify on behalf of the cities in town. Hello. But we have intelligent people, and they don't all have to be people of color. Intelligent people that may not have been police officers or law enforcement, but they studied it, and they're very up to date with it, that they can bring stuff to the table without having to be an actual police or law enforcement officer.
And I would agree with that. But I don't think that what Representative Norrie was necessarily different than what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't think it was ill-intended. I can honestly say that from him.
Okay.
Rep,
Are we ready?
no,
Oh, okay.
Rep Batista, I believe.
Representative
Jello?
Baptista.
So first I'll say, Representative Norrie, you have a tough job tonight. And I appreciate you for, I've only known you a short span of time, but I believe that you are somebody who is sincere in wanting to have these conversations. And I know it's not easy when these things happen in the national news, and for lack of being the only law enforcement official in the room, you sometimes get the brunt of it. So I give you a lot of credit for that and for sparing the dialogue. And I would respond with what I think is an appropriate comparison. And I don't know, but I'd be curious to hear from both yourself and Representative Corvese. When I hear you bring up the concern about lay people, quote unquote, making decisions about police officers, I understand that you're not calling lay people stupid. I struggle with that, however, because I noticed one of the written testimonies tonight for this bill said something along the lines of, name one profession where people who don't participate in that profession get to judge people in that profession. And they listed politicians. And I think that's a terrible example because it proves our point. Politicians, quote unquote, elected officials, I think we're very similar to police. We are government, we're public, we serve. And voters who have zero knowledge of what it's like to be in this building make terrible decisions all the time with regard to who they vote for, who they support, why they support them. I mean, voters, with all due respect to the voters who voted for me, can be profoundly irrational. And so my question in all seriousness is, how is being a police officer and being held to account as a police officer different from us being elected officials, public officials, and the way we have to be held to account? I can do an extraordinary job. I hope I'm doing an extraordinary job. And the voters can vote me out tomorrow. So why is it that we have such a different, and that's a sincere question. There may be a good answer out there. I haven't thought it through yet, but as we're talking, and as I read the testimony and I hear this, you know, we can't have lay people judging us and what we do. Why? Is it not we, the people, civilians, who create the police, who decide how we are policed, and not the other way around? Because what I think, and to the point of what I think Representative Williams was trying to say, when we hear police say, you can't judge what we do, that's alarming to me. And some of the language we heard around here with the gun bills, and we can't have the government telling us what to do, and we're law-abiding people, and you can't infringe on our rights. I wonder how some of those folks would respond when we hear government officials, police officers say to us, well, you can't really judge what we do. I understand what you're saying, and there's probably some things that you're really right about with really specific, complicated policies, but trying to fill in the blanks between what you and Representative Williams are saying, I just wonder if police officers and elected officials are so different in that regard, and why it is that, we can make decisions about voting for us or not, but those same people are not qualified to make decisions about how we're policed. Does that make sense? And so that's an open question to be answered tonight, another night, over lunch, whatever else.
Thank you, Representative Baptista. So we're going to put one more bill in play, and that's House Bill 5140 by Chairman Bennett. Chairman, are you with us? He's on the WebEx. I see him.
Here we go.
There you are. Welcome,
doing?
Chairman. So,
Thank you very much.
House
My
Bill
will be a lot-
5140, an act relating to state affairs and government law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, amends the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights to require that a person wishing to serve as a third member of a hearing committee attend training, and would amend the suspension period for minor violations and the appeals procedure. So please proceed, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'd just like to start off by saying that Rhode Island officers are better trained than most other states. They spend more time in the police academy. They spend almost a full year in the field training before they can go out on their own. Bill 5140 just does two minor changes, and I will let my witness, Tony Capezza, explain them, because he's more of an expert than I am. But that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Any members of the committee have a question for the sponsor? Seeing none, we're going to try to get to our list of witnesses. So we have several witnesses for these four bills, and if you're going to testify on more than one bill, please indicate that. So I believe we have several people on the line waiting. Is that so? Oh, okay. Okay, so we're going to start with Representative Morales because he wants to testify on behalf of some of these bills. Representative Morales? Hopefully, we can be somewhat brief. We still got a long calendar to go.
No worries whatsoever, Madam Chair. So just thank you again for the opportunity to speak on House Bill 6152 and 6153, introduced by Representative Williams. Tonight, I am proudly speaking on behalf of the State House Black and Latino Caucus. Now, as discussed, these bills would amend and reform the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights to ensure that there is greater and much needed accountability concerning misconduct from a law enforcement officer. Now, since 2015, over the last half-decade, more than 800 people across the country have died at the hands of law enforcement each year, with the vast majority of these victims being Black and Latino males between the age of 20 and 40. Of these 6,000-plus deaths, of these 6,000-plus lives that were taken from their families, there are some names that we remember more than others. From Breonna Taylor, Stephen Clark, Philando Castile, George Floyd, Alton Sterling, just to name a few. In almost every case, from the ones that the mainstream media covers to the ones that receive little media attention, there is little to no accountability for the officers who caused these deaths, even if there is clear footage showing the intention of their actions and the lack of reasoning for lethal force. Now, I understand it can be easy to shrug off everything I just said and look at it from the lens of, well, that's not Rhode Island. It's everywhere else except for here. However, I want to name several cases of police violence where there has been little to no accountability due to the privileges and protections that come with our state's antiquated law enforcement Bill of Rights. March 2013, Joshua Robinson, a Providence resident, was stopped by Providence police allegedly for a traffic violation while driving home from his girlfriend's house on the south side of Providence. By the police department's own account, officers began beating the 21-year-old Joshua while he was still behind the wheel of his car, first striking him in the forehead with a flashlight, then choking him, dragging him out, and throwing him to the ground, punching him repeatedly in the face, kneeing him in the ribs, and pepper spraying him. A lawsuit was later filed in federal court detailing this violence towards Mr. Robinson. This case and trial would go on for years until 2020, when the city of Providence settled to pay Robinson $72,500. Meanwhile, no officer was held accountable for their actions and level of excessive force due to the barriers presented by Lieber. April 2020, Providence Officer Hanley and two other officers walked up to Richard Gore's car, opened the passenger door, and dragged him onto the ground as they began to assault him by kicking him, punching him, and verbally berating him. Following this case of police brutality and excessive violence, Officer Hanley was on 6 months of paid administrative leave, a privileged provision under Lieber. It would not be until nearly a year later in March of 2021 that there was finally some level of accountability due to a leaked body camera footage showing the violence that occurred that night. All that said, there is a severe lack of accountability and transparency when it comes to holding local law enforcement accountable due to the nature of the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, which only allows for police chiefs to suspend officers for 2 days with pay for minor violations of departmental rules and regulations. Meanwhile, other forms of discipline, including terminations, are required to be decided by a 3-member panel made up of active or retired officers, which in of itself is a broken system due to the natural biasness, given that they are not neutral parties, as concluded by the Senate Lieber Task Force this past winter. Now, I understand that this is a law that has been in place since the 1970s due to the influence of police unions. Nevertheless, it is absolutely necessary that we as the General Assembly do what we can to make it fair, balanced, rooted in justice, and ensure that there is accountability for law enforcement through the provision of House Bill 6152 and/or 6153, which would allow for a chief of police and/or hearing committee to impose further discipline against misconduct, alongside 30 days of unpaid suspension, the record keeping of an officer's disciplinary history, and the termination of post-employment benefits. It is through these amendments and standards of accountability that we will be able to foster safer communities, especially for our communities of color. Thank you.
Doc.
Representative, the first few sentences of your speech, give me the statistics again. You said there were 800, and then you said 6,000, and I kind of lost you.
Since 2015, over the last half-decade, more than 800 people across the country have died at the hands of law enforcement each year.
Each year?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions of the witness? Thank you, Representative Morales. We can start teeing up the callers. Hello, welcome to the House Committee on Judiciary. Could you please state your name, and you have 1.5 minutes to give your testimony.
My name is Nathan Levin Askinson. I'm testifying tonight in favor of House Bill 6152 after a good long hour and 42-minute wait. So, the reason that this bill is important, although it falls well short of the many radical changes needed to fix and minimize policing in the state of Rhode Island, a proper accountability mechanism is crucial. The previous structure, wherein 3 of the 5 members were retired law enforcement officers, is inherently flawed, as we have seen in models nationwide, that law enforcement is completely unwilling to regulate itself, and nowhere is that more evident than in the many times that we have seen here and elsewhere in the nation. Law enforcement officers act violently towards the members of the community that they are sworn to protect, murder the members of the community that they are sworn to protect, And these things are not limited to the Brooklyn centers and Minneapolis of the world. We have seen here in Rhode Island and Providence, police officers run down young men, police officers snatch people off the street, police officers engage in violence against protesters. And that kind of behavior demands accountability, and it demands a proper accountability mechanism made up of civilians with no ties to law enforcement as the majority of the mechanism. Thank you for your time, and have a good night.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next witness.
You can testify.
You got it? Hello, you're on the air with the House Judiciary Committee. You can proceed with your testimony. You have a minute and a half to testify.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation in to the People's House to treat on a topic that is quite near and dear to everybody's hearts. My thanks especially not only to all of you on the committee, but to absolutely everybody who has taken time as private individuals, as members of organizations, and otherwise to come in and talk to you all about right and wrong. How great to be in the Judiciary Committee and talk about what is right and what is wrong. Don't you feel it? Don't you feel it in your hearts? This is not a legal matter. For many of us, this is a matter of life and death. You know what the right thing is to do. We're hearing on a bunch of bills tonight, 6153, 6152, 6148, and more. I'm talking to you tonight as a private citizen and also in the matter of qualified immunity as a member of Amnesty International USA Local 1016. We have stricken this down at the federal level. What is Rhode Island waiting on? And as far as the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, why is this still a thing? Nothing is around from the 70s. Not 8 tracks, not bell bottoms. Why is this still here? Let's follow Maryland. Let's get on track. Hey, thank you all. That's all the time I've got, right?
Thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. Next
You too.
witness, please. Hello, welcome. You're on the air with the House Judiciary Committee. You have a minute and a half to testify. Please proceed.
Thank you so much. My name is Hillary Levy-Friedman, and I'm president of the Rhode Island chapter of the National Organization for Women. I'm a Providence resident represented by Evie Agello, the second sponsor on the bills I'm speaking in support of this evening, 6152 and 6153, which make vital and necessary changes to the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. I want to thank Chair Williams for her leadership and for talking to Rhode Island Now about this bill. Now, one of Rhode Island Now's 5 core goals is to end racism, and this bill is a crucial first step in a long, long journey to come. What these bills do most importantly is provide greater transparency. They also increase accountability and increase disciplinary options for those who oversee law enforcement officers. How do they do this? First, by including community leaders on hearing committees, as you've heard about, and by allowing a police chief more authority to reprimand and more. Our communities of color in Rhode Island have suffered for too long by the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights that's currently in place. Inaction on this matter could certainly be interpreted by some as complicity. So we must act now to better things for residents of this state. As we all know, the stakes have never been higher. So please vote this out of committee and to a full floor vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Next witness, please. Good evening. Welcome to the House Judiciary Committee. You're on the air. You have a minute and a half to testify.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee. My name is John Donnelly. I am the newly elected president of the Rhode Island Fraternal Order of Police. I have not had the pleasure or the opportunity to meet with all of you, especially Ms. Williams. I'll be glad to. In general, the FOP, due to the highly specialized nature of our employment, generally we would be against altering the composition of the panel. However, this is not off the board completely. I've listened to your powerful testimony, and I'm willing to work with all of you, and I'm willing to take any questions. I'm open to any kind of dialogue, and I'm hoping we can meet with you sooner than later.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'm sure I have your number here, so I will give that number to Chairwoman Williams, and hopefully you guys will get together.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Next witness, please. Got somebody? Hello, you're on the air. You're with the House Judiciary Committee. You have a minute and a half to testify.
Hi, my name is Andrew Poya. I'm calling in support of House Bill 6148, the Probation Reform Bill. I'm also in support of the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights 6153, 6152, and 5613 reforms. I'm supporting the probationary reform bill because it goes to make reforms that are needed in order to not coerce people that are on probation to being taking plea deals and being stuck in at the ACI for things that they haven't done, and to allow them to have their full due process. So I hope that you support the reform, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness, please. Hello, you're on the air. You're before the House Judiciary Committee. You have a minute and a half to testify.
Hi, I'd like to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity today. I'm speaking in opposition of this bill. I'm sure you've heard a lot of testimony, so I'd just like to speak in the reality of things. If inclusiveness is the message we're trying to preach, maybe you should hear it from the people that are doing this job every day. And I would like to first introduce myself. I'm Lieutenant Tom Jones from the North Province Police, and I'm the union president there. But some of the things that you've listened to today, that, you know, speaking about our due process, it wouldn't be right to let citizens not have a due process in a criminal matter. Officers need that due process as well, which the way this legislation is proposed, it's taken away that, and it wants people that aren't even trained in the field to judge the actions of a trained police officer, which makes no sense. And when we look at it, I feel a minute's not long enough, and that's the problem. We're not having an inclusive conversation so you can hear from both sides to get the reform that we're looking for. What is the objective we're trying to achieve here? And you got to understand, the good officers that are out there every single day, the talented men and women that are in the communities that all of you live in, are doing more good and not using the Bill of Rights process. And the officers that have to go through the Bill of Rights process actually get fired through the Bill of Rights process. So if the reform is what we're looking for, this isn't the way to go about it. And I mean, why don't we start really looking at the real problems, maybe the shift into funding for training? I mean, we have suicide rates in law enforcement across the country. Right here in Rhode Island, we're seeing it. And, you know, we're not having these conversations, but yet we want to reform the due process, that if a police officer creates a criminal charge while he's on the job, the Bill of Rights doesn't matter. If that's what the objective is, it's already being taken care of. This bill seeks to create 5-position hearing panel, which would, again, as I stated, you want us to be judged by people that don't even know what it's like to walk a minute in a police officer's shoes. I don't understand where the expert information that you guys received on this, but I can tell you nobody's come and knocked on my door or the men and women of our rank and file to get our advice. You know, there's abuses of authority and power within the rank and file, hostile work environments. If that's something that's a real thing amongst the ranks. By the way this legislation is proposed, automatically giving an officer a 30-day suspension for not wearing his hat or her hat because of a superior officer doesn't like that individual. Do you think that's fair without a due process?
Tom?
When we know that, yes.
Tom, you had a minute and 30 seconds and you've exceeded it. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Are you willing to take a call or get together with Chairwoman Anastasia Williams to discuss your concerns?
I've been asking. I asked Representative Bly not too long ago in a meeting. I've been asking
I will make
sense.
I will make arrangements, Lieutenant, to have your telephone number given to Anastasia Williams right now. And Dr.
And I
Corvese,
apologize for not having my stuff prepared. I thought it was over with, so I apologize. This was just shooting off the hip, but I just want to have a common sense conversation. Just get the other sides, the stuff that you guys aren't hearing, and maybe we can work on it together. If inclusiveness is the message, let's do it together.
Lieutenant, if everybody's got an open mind, you can figure it out. So
I believe that. I really do.
Your state rep, though, has a question for you, Dr. Corvese.
Yes.
How are you?
Good. How are you, sir? I'm sorry it's so late in the night and I wasn't fully prepared, but...
That's quite all right. What I do want to do is I want to touch base with you about this. So,
I appreciate that.
I want to talk to you about this. Why don't you call my office, leave your name and number, and you and I are going to sit down and talk, because you hit upon a number of issues tonight. Not only issues that are included in the bill with Representative Williams, but also some other issues I'd like to discuss with you.
I would love that. I would love that.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, and I'll call you tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm sorry I exceeded, but I had a bullet point, but I wanted to just talk to the realistic stuff to this bill, and I'm looking forward to sitting with you, sir.
Thank you very much. Next witness, please. Welcome. You're on the air with the House Judiciary Committee. You've got a minute and a half to give your testimony. Hello.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Tony, how you doing?
Good. And honorable members of the committee, Tony Capezza, Legislative Director of the International Brotherhood of Police Officers. I'm going to start off with H 6152 and 53. They're basically the same bills. I listened to all the testimony so far, including Anastasia Williams. And Chairman Williams, and I've known her for a long time. She's always been a very sincere person, and I believe she's sincere in what she's saying tonight. But what she's saying is something altogether different than the Bill of Rights. I've heard no testimony where the Bill of Rights would have come into play. Our Bill of Rights is for departmental violations, and it only comes into play after an officer has been charged. If there's been no charges levied against the officer, there is no Bill of Rights. So I think we're talking two different issues here. And I just wanted to clarify one thing that she did say. I did speak to her on 2 occasions, and the way it was left, which I relayed to her, was that she had wanted me to go back to my people and see what they were willing to give up. And I did check with them, and that was just before the Senate Commission was being formed. At that time, they weren't willing to negotiate that way what they were willing to give up, because we didn't know what the Senate Commission was going to do. And furthermore, we thought it was going to be a give and take. So, like I said, I do believe she's sincere in what she said, but I don't believe any of the things that she testified to tonight has anything to do with the Bill of Rights. As far as and I'm only going to hit on 2 actual areas of my testimony because I did have written testimony. But she brought up the piano. The problem I got with and this is in all the bills, one of the problems I've got with the 5-person panel and the permanent panel is, in none of the bills that mentions a 5-person panel, a permanent panel, does it say what happens if one of those people has a conflict of interest. There's nothing in the bills where you have backups to put on the committee to hear the case. And like the other police officers that testified, I do believe that there should be police officers on the panel. And that's not unique because other professions, and police officers are professionals, also have disciplinary panels. For example, the judiciary discipline panel is made up of 12 members, but 8 of them are lawyers, and 4 of them are members of the public. Nurses, Board of Nursing, they have a 15-member panel, and 13 of them are nurses. Doctors, they have a medical panel, 13 of people sit on that panel, and 6 of them are doctors. So, as you can see on all these panels, the majority come from whatever profession that the person being disciplined is from. As far as the 30-day suspension, I don't know if anybody ever looked at it and broke it down into dollars and cents. But you got to keep in mind this is strictly for minor departmental violation. A 30-day suspension for one of my Westerly police officers would amount to $10,514. We know that minor felony penalties aren't even that high. I'm not going to say anything else on these 2 bills because, like I said, I do have written testimony. In reference to Representative Ray's bill, I only have a couple of comments on that concern. Again, if you have a permanent panel, what happens if somebody's got a conflict? And the cutting down the amount of days to have, I'm not sure that you can actually do a hearing in 45 days. As you know, Chairman, a Bill of Rights hearing is a mini trial. And getting the witnesses together and police officers being able to get the time off, or anybody for that matter, to do consecutive days would be very difficult. So I think that could be a problem. I'm not against the bill. I just wanted to raise some concerns that I had.
Tony, you got about 15 more seconds, Tony.
Okay, I'm going to get right to Representative Bennett's bill. That bill increases the 2 days summary punishment to 5 days, and the officer would only be able to grieve it on just cause, not because he didn't like the amount of days that he got. And one of the other changes was what we heard. A lot of chiefs thought that the neutrals were not educated in the Bill of Rights. So we put a clause in there that they would have to take training, which would be set up by the Police Chiefs Association, and possibly that training would be offered through Roger Williams University, which we found out does have a course on the Bill of Rights. So,
all right, Tony, thank you very much for your testimony.
Okay, Chairman.
There's a question from Representative Knight.
Hi, Mr. Capezza. How are you?
Good, Rep. How you doing?
I'm good. I was anticipating your phone call tonight because I wanted to hear your reaction, and I want to posit something to you and ask if you see it maybe the way I do, or if not, why not? You mentioned that, other professions, when they have boards and, that control discipline or licensing or whatnot, are made up of those professionals, and I get that, and I understand that. And I think that there has to be, with respect to review of police officers' performance, there has to be an informed opinion. I agree with you on that. But the unique thing about policing is that, police departments are an arm of the government, and they have to be subject to, they have to be subject to civilian control. They just have to. And our problem is that the way, I believe that in some of our communities in the United States, civilian control has been lost, and in some departments, self-discipline and self-governance of the department by the profession, by the members of the police, has failed. We've seen that time and time again in the news media, where officers are clearly unreasonable, and those are just the times that they've caught on video. While I recognize that we're a big country and there's a ton of police officers who are doing it right every day, and I'll just pause for a second and say my dad was an officer, and I grew up in that community. So
Sure.
I wonder if there's a way to amend LIBOR such that it provides for a strong check and balance for in favor of civilian control. Is that something that you would be open to, or do you agree with me, disagree with me, or something else?
I'm not sure what you mean by civilian control. I mean, when you say civilian control, are you talking about all civilians on a panel, or?
No, I don't think so, but I think that I know from my own experience that sometimes, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but sometimes police departments can become insular and inward-looking and develop an us versus them attitude with the communities that they police. And it has been traditionally particularly a problem in communities of color. So what can we do what can we do to combat that insularity? I think part of the solution is to provide in the performance review and disciplinary process a real role, an active role for an entity that exists outside the department. So I suppose that's my specific question. How would you feel about amending LIBOR so that in any particular disciplinary proceeding, there is somebody who is from outside the department and outside the profession sitting in judgment of the police officer? I understand that there's issues with knowledge and whatnot, but we can overcome that. Just like Chair Williams said, we have expert testimony in courts for juries. I mean, we can come up with an education system. But I guess my question is the profession open to having somebody who is not of the profession sit in judgment of a police officer at a disciplinary hearing?
I think there's room for discussion if you're talking a panel that would be similar to the other professionals. For example, the judiciary panel, if that's what you're referring to as having the civilians also sit on the panel, I think that's a discussion that, could be had.
Okay. We got a lot, I appreciate that. We have a lot of bills to work through, and I think there's a lot of good ideas in there. And I appreciate that we're starting that conversation. I hope it's not too long before we finish it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Okay, next witness. Welcome to the House Committee on Judiciary. You're on the air. You've got a minute and a half to testify.
Thank you, Chairman Craven, and members of the committee, some very esteemed colleagues among them, and especially thank you, Chairwoman Williams, for your inspiration, for your leadership on this. I believe that's what's going to get us through to a solution. I do want to, when you were speaking, it made me think of so many examples of the pain that folks in our community have gone through. And I apologize, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Shauna Kurland. I'm the legal director at Providence Youth Student Movement, or PRISM, in Providence. And I'm also a proud resident of Ward 9 in Providence, where we see a lot of police misconduct in our community. I do want to talk about the pain that I've seen from so many people that I've been witness to, and especially last summer, looking in the faces of the young people, hearing their voices as they tried to challenge the system that's been causing so many murders of black people, so many abuses throughout the system. And it really speaks to what Vice Chair Knight described, this lack of civilian control. There was no civilian control in Providence. Very quickly, I know our time's limited, I do want to, Mr. Capezza just now said that there hadn't been a testimony about an example where the Bill of Rights, law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights would have made a difference. Let me give you one example. An older gentleman, disabled, was in his front yard on Elmwood Avenue videotaping police conduct that he thought was questionable, well within his rights under the First Amendment. An older black man, a certain officer, a sergeant at the time, ordered his two jump-out boys to literally jump a fence, chase this man into his home, tackle him, take away his phone, and erase the video. After successful the civilian complaint process, the internal process, which in Providence has to actually allow you a hearing only because of a consent decree from 1973 under federal court, he was given, this sergeant was given a 2-day suspension, and that was it, for ordering that kind of behavior. So what I'm just giving that example to say, yes, it does make a difference. This isn't the only solution, but the kind of pain that we've seen is so strong. They tell us, don't fight it on the streets, fight it in the courts. Well, in the courts, then we're also dealing with not only their limited capacity, but the AGs, for instance, even their Civil Rights Division has the word plantations on the letterhead still. We're told then we'll go get the laws changed, and that's why we're here. Things like the mandatory termination for certain offenses, lying on a police report. It would be great if we didn't have to deal with that, if that wasn't allowed, if that was punished, because unfortunately, yes, we want to give the police chiefs some guidance, because unfortunately in some cities such as mine, the elected officials do not give them any guidance or limits. And that is something that this bill would provide under 6152. That would be in Section 11. You have some good provisions around discovery, and that's worth keeping. You do have, I think it's very important to remember that regular people can be can do great service on these committees, despite what and with respect to Representative Norrie, what he said, but officers don't know our neighborhoods, yet they're entrusted to walk around with guns and the power to arrest people in our neighborhoods. And sometimes they don't even, yes.
Shauna, you got 15 seconds.
Okay. I just want to say I think this is a great opportunity. Obviously, there's a lot of things to be figured out, but if you really think it is bad apples, then make it possible to remove them, because right now we've got some very nasty applesauce. Oh, last quick comment. The sergeant who had done all that and got the 2-day suspension, he ended up being promoted to lieutenant, and now he's the treasurer of the Providence Fraternal Order of Police. So thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you as we go forward.
Thank you, Shauna. Next witness, please. Hello, you're on the air before the House Committee on Judiciary. You've got 1 minute and 30 seconds to testify.
Good evening, Chairman. It's Sid Wardell from the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association.
Hey, Sid.
How are you, sir? Thank you to you and your members there of the committee, certainly putting a lot of time in on these important topics. I am here speaking on behalf of the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association. I did submit written testimony as well as the testimony that was submitted for the Senate task force, as well as some information regarding survey of actual disciplinary actions that have been taken throughout the state of Rhode Island with law enforcement. So one of the things I would like to just clarify is the fact that the Rhode Island Police Chiefs police chiefs, remember, are the actual disciplinarians in this process. We were not intending to ever be a part of negotiation or on that behalf. Merely what our duty to do is to bring factual data to the table, and that's what my testimony to the Senate and certainly would like to do for you folks here today. I will say that we've hit on a bunch of topics that the public participation, and I know I just heard Rep. Knight speaking about public participation. You know, I think law enforcement, we need to, and I think we have embraced the idea of transparency, and that transparency in particular to this topic is to be able to show them how the process, how it works, and that it is working. And certainly if there's times that it's not, then, you know, that goes as a strike against us. But we can show in the surveys and the information that I provided, there's been hundreds of instances of discipline, and I know Mr. Cabeza had spoken to it as well. You know, these are supposed to be incidents where discipline was needed. The reason for discipline is corrective action of an officer. Otherwise, you would be looking for termination. And the Leah Bore, quite frankly, is used very infrequently, and I think that's because the discipline that is handed out by officers who do the wrong thing are accepted of that discipline. So I know you've heard a lot of testimony. I certainly don't want to take any more of your time, but I am available for any questions.
Thanks, Sid. I don't see any questions. Thank you for your testimony. Next witness, please. Hello, you're on the air with the House Judiciary Committee. You have a minute and a half to testify.
Thank you. So I'm Randall Rose. I hear a big conceptual confusion in a lot of the critics' testimony, so let me clear that up. I'm one of the many people who wants to get rid of Leo Bore, but I actually think there's a place for Leo Bore. If an officer faces discipline for backing their squad car into a wall or something like that for an administrative violation that doesn't involve alleged harms to civilians, Leo Bore is actually a wise law in that case. You don't need lay people going to through police policies in a mere administrative case. You can just have a hearing committee of police or government employees. So if it's just administrative, fine. Leo Bore makes sense. It was designed for that. But what we're coming to realize over the years is a lot of issues that are facing police discipline are not like that. When it comes to all the abuses that have festered under police chiefs or when the issues are handled in an internal bureaucracy, all the abuses like mistreating civilians or violating their rights, that's different. Then you do need lay people involved. And the original sin of Leo Bore is treating misconduct towards civilians as if it's just an administrative violation. So I think misconduct towards civilians needs to be treated differently, and we need to make a lot of changes. With alleged misconduct towards civilians, we need a lot more representation from the communities that are being hurt and humiliated on the hearing committee. I want due process. I want it for everyone, but when civilians' rights are involved, the procedure you need for due process and a fair process needs to be a lot more heavily civilian involved. And Rep. Williams' bills, I'm glad they're put in. I support them. They don't go far enough because still all or almost all members of the hearing committee would come from the police or the government, and that would never be allowed on the jury. So you can see it's not a fair procedure. Nowhere near enough. The committee comes from the community and the people most affected. I agree with Representative Knight on this. And of course, Representative Noray's bill from that perspective is just too little, too late, still the wrong body to deciding things. All the bills keep Leo Bore's excessively gentle investigative process, which is fine for merely administrative discipline if it's not about harm to civilian individuals. But in the worst cases of harm to civilians, we need more robust investigations, and I agree with the criticisms from the League of Cities and Towns. I know Representative Williams wanted to revise Leo Bore and not repeal it, and maybe that's what's practical at this stage. So when one of Representative Williams' bills passes this year, not if, but when it passes this year, unfortunately Rhode Island will still be left with a Leo Bore on the books at a time when other states are repealing their Leo Bore entirely. I don't want us to have the disgrace of still having a Leo board that treats abusive acts towards civilians as if it was just an in-house employee matter, but I appreciate Representative Williams' efforts, particularly support H6152 with the provisions for automatic termination for the worst offenses, I like some of the provisions in 6153 as well, like allowing video evidence to be released by the police force at any time, which Leo Board currently seems to ban.
Randall,
Yes.
Randall, 10 seconds, wrap it up.
Okay, so I think it's a good. I think it's a good step forward. Hopefully, it will be a landmark bill, and I think there needs to be a lot more transparency and more external oversight, not so much of an internal process when it's when harm to civilians' rights are involved. So I'm glad constitutional rights are becoming stronger, but Leo Bohr stands in the way. So let's try to make some more changes, and not just Rep. Williams' bill, but make more changes in future years. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Randall. Next witness, please. Welcome to the House Committee on Judiciary. You're on the air. You have a minute and a half to testify.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll keep my comments brief. First, I'd like to thank the 10 representatives who introduced Bill number 6153. First, I'd like to say that I'm neutral, but also in favor of 6153 because it gives our communities a fighting chance. Our communities are defenseless against the police officers' Bill of Rights and those who use it to blame a stop sign for leaving a human being in a coma. Do you blame a bowling ball for hitting the pins of do you blame a bowling ball for hitting the pins, or do you blame the person who threw the ball? Who gets that award? I'm appalled by the lack of accountability on behalf of the Providence Police and the entire establishment that holds up this unfair and inequitable ideals of scapegoating, backpedaling, and aggressive use of force. This fight is not over, and I implore the PPD to start doing what the rest of the community has already started doing, which is protecting their own, rather protecting outside interests. I want to know why. I want to know how many open cases there are of hate crimes in the city, and I want to know what the PPD has been doing to cover them up. If this seems like a task that this committee is unable to do, I'm happy to step in and do it for you. Thank you for your time, and good day.
Thank you very much. Next witness, please. Hello, you're before the House Judiciary Committee. You're on the air, and you have a minute and a half to testify.
Hello, my name is Justice Gaines, and I'm the Queer Justice Coordinator at Prison Providence Youth Student Movement. I first wanted to thank Chairwoman Representative Williams for really doing a lot of work in trying to pull different folks together on these bills, and I definitely have learned a lot in this process. I did want to also reflect some of what Representative Knight spoke about. Right now, Leah Bohr is not actually due process for law enforcement officers. It's an extra layer of due process for law enforcement officers that no other citizen, residents, or public servants in the state have. And so removing Leah Bohr and reforming Leah Bohr in line with these bills wouldn't actually remove due process for law enforcement officers. It would simply make it a little bit more of an even playing field. Right now, law enforcement, police have the authority to kill individuals in our state, to kill residents of our state, to arrest us, to enforce laws. And so with this extra authority, we've made it harder in our state to hold them accountable. So we're entrusting public servants, and police, again, are public servants, with a higher level of authority without giving our public the mechanisms to hold them accountable, and to, as Representative Knight said, be able to exert community control over the police. I think it's really important that we look at Leah Bohr, we make some of these changes, and whether that's giving chiefs more power to
15 seconds, please.
Yes, to discipline, but also recognizing that police shouldn't be entrusted to police themselves. It should really be the public that is allowed to understand and hold the police accountable to their duties.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next witness, please. Welcome. You're on the air with the House Judiciary Committee. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds to testify.
Thank you, and good evening, Chairman Craven, honorable members of the committee. My name is Haley McKee. I am co-chair of the Substance Use Policy Education and Recovery PAC. I'm also a person who is formerly incarcerated. I am here in strong support of Bill 6148. I'm going to come from the lens of the recovery community. I work with people. I'm on probation myself until 2028, and I will tell you it is scary as all hell. We know at any given point that we can get picked up and brought in and held for the 10 days or whatever time that they allocate. And I work with people as a counselor in a clinic every single day, running an outpatient program, that are held oftentimes for what is essentially symptoms of their medical condition. And when it's like putting a blindfold on a person, spinning them around in a circle, they're wondering, and I would urge the committee members to think about themselves and say, all right, we're going to put you away for 10 days in a box. We're going to put you away, and you're not going to know how your dog is going to get fed, how your kids are going to get off the bus, or anything of the sort, for something petty. And it becomes like kind of a chicken and an egg kind of thing. So it disrupts the continuity of care for a lot of people who I work with. They lose their access to medically assisted recovery housing, their jobs. And we're going to hear from a lot of other expert witnesses who are going to speak as to how that's impacted them personally. But I'm in strong support of this bill. I think that we know that there's serious flaws in our probation practices in the state of Rhode Island.
Haley?
We're one of the worst in the nation.
Haley?
Yes.
You have 15 seconds.
Yes. Oh, thank you. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, and I thank the committee, and I thank Representative Batista for his legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness, please. Welcome to the House Committee on Judiciary. You're on the air. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds to testify. Hello?
Hello. Hi. My name is Anusha Ellis. I'm a staff organizer at Direct Action for Rights and Equality. Thank you so much for considering Bill 6148. And I organize with the Behind the Walls Committee. It's a group of people who have been impacted by incarceration, and we're the folks who developed and introduced this bill. We chose to focus on probation because we all know people who are deeply impacted by the probation system. Rhode Island actually has the second highest rate of people on probation in the country. And the way that it works here is that it keeps people cycling in and out and in and out. So even though the rates of incarceration are low, the probation, the fact that so many people are on probation means that people are constantly being reincarcerated. So it takes very little to be considered a violator. Low-level offenses that would normally be addressed through fines or community service become a reason for incarceration when you're on probation. So it's basically a prison sentence dangling over your head. And we identified bail reform as a small step that would significantly impact people's lives because right now when somebody's accused of a violation, they're reincarcerated for up to 10 days, usually before they have a hearing. And being held for those 10 days with the violation hanging over your head is how people end up being coerced into plea deals. It's very difficult for people to connect with lawyers, and they'll do anything to go home because no one can afford to be sitting there for 10 days and to lose their jobs and their housing and to be away from their children. And I'll just wrap it up by saying it puts a huge amount of stress on people to know that they could be snatched off the streets at any point, always having to watch every move, knowing that you could be taken away from your family for 2 weeks. The stress alone is really debilitating. And I talk to people every day who feel really trapped by that. So I hope that this is something that you'll consider supporting. I think it's a really important move for for creating justice in our communities and allowing people to actually reintegrate and move forward with their lives after incarceration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. All right, I believe we've kind of transformed over into a couple of other bills. So what I'd like to do is take the three bills submitted by Representative Batista, put them all in play, and then you can take the rostrum up there, Bud. And the first is House Bill 5993. Hang on 1 minute. Okay, Representative Batista. It's 5993. It's an act related to state affairs and government. It's the Rashad K. Gore Justice and Policy Act. It provides police reform by requiring body cameras and makes certain methods of restraining a felon, such as chokeholds and using the foot as a weapon, to be illegal. And then the second one is 6104, it's an act related to state affairs and government, police officers. Commission on Standards and Training requires all police officers to be certified through the Municipal Police Training Academy and complete mandatory continuing education, and creates a process in which the police may be decertified for failure to maintain proper certification. And the last of Representative Batista's three bills are an act related to criminal procedure, sentencing, and execution. It mandates the courts to release defendants on alleged probation violations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I know it's been a long night, and so I will try to fulfill my responsibilities and give these bills the time and attention they deserve while being mindful of all of you, and
Please.
probably you're way past your bedtime. I want to speak briefly on each bill and give it the outline what each bill does. But I want to very briefly just acknowledge the recent incidents that have happened in the country with the recent incidents in Minnesota that have resulted in yet another killing of a young man at the hands of a police interaction, as well as the interaction of Second Lieutenant Nazario in Virginia that was pepper sprayed while in uniform. And the reality is that any way we slice it, as we've heard tonight, there's a problem, a big problem. And I don't think it's controversial to say that. And I've spent the last 7 years as an attorney, the last 30 plus my entire life as a person of color in South Providence, and most recently trying to do police oversight in Providence. And I believe that there's an answer to the question, how can we fix this, or can we fix this? I believe the answer is yes. And if we confront this question honestly and earnestly, if we set aside our judgment and prejudice, if we cut through the noise in the politics, and if I can personally condense and synthesize my experience, I think that the answer to that question, how can we fix this, can be told with a quick 30-second parable, if you'll indulge me. I read this on the internet. I'm not going to take credit for it, but it's a way of thinking of the problem that exists when we think about community police relationships. And it has to do with the word respect. We think about respect in our society in at least one of two ways. The respect that we give each other as people, even if we're strangers, acknowledging each other as human beings. The other kind of respect that we think about in our society is those that we give to somebody in a position of authority, like a coach or a parent. And sometimes in our society, somebody who's in a position of authority will say to somebody who's not, if you don't respect me, I won't respect you. And what they mean is, whether they realize it or not, whether they intend it or not, whether they know it or not, what they mean is, if you don't respect my authority, I won't respect your person. I won't respect your humanity. And we see that play over time and time again in these incidents where civilians are told simply to obey. And in fact, there's numerous examples in Rhode Island case law where our Supreme Court has interpreted the resisting arrest statute to say, even if the arrest is illegal, even if you as a person in Rhode Island are being arrested illegally, your duty is to comply. And if you don't comply, that in and of itself will be a crime, resisting arrest. And that was at the heart of what happened with Rashard Gore. And so I will take the bills in reverse order and address why each one will be critical to beginning to address the sorts of reforms we need to see in our criminal justice system. Now, Bill 6148, that I want to thank personally several advocates that I've been working with on this bill, including Margaret Chung, who was a colleague of mine at the Public Defender's Office and has done extraordinary work, Attorney Bruce Riley, and Ms. Anusha Ullis. 6148 is a bill that will reform our practices with probation and sentencing. Right now, Statute 12-19-9 reads that a court may hold a defendant held without bail in the instance of a violation of probation. Although the word is may, all too often, as probably Representative Knight and Representative Craves can confirm, all too often, a court will simply automatically hold somebody on probation held without bail if they're accused of a violation. This bill will change the language and make it easier for a judge to either set bail or, even better, release somebody on their own personal recognizance. And oftentimes when somebody's on probation, there's tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders right now under government surveillance, which makes it far too easy to be held without bail for a short period of time, just enough time to lose your job if you have one, lose your housing if you have one, and make it substantially more likely that your children will be in the criminal justice system if you have them. And I will let the advocates discuss that bill a little bit further. Bill number 6104 will create an office of, where is it? Shall create the Office of Police Officer Standards and Accreditation Commission. This will bring Rhode Island out of the dark. Right at the moment, there are 46 states, 4 who don't, Rhode Island being one of the 4, who have a statewide certification process for police officers. In other words, a commission that is charged with supervising the training academy, the accreditation process, such that if a police officer commits an act where he loses accreditation, that police officer can no longer be a police officer in any other city or town, as opposed to the practice now, where you can be fired at one city or town for misconduct and simply hired in another city or town. And so this will bring us in line with the 46 other states. The commission will have 15 members serving 3 years each. 7 will be separate members of the law enforcement community. 7 will be non-members of the law enforcement community appointed by the governor, and a chair appointed by the governor. Some of the reasons why a police officer can be decertified would be committing a felony, obtaining a false confession, committing a hate crime, or sustaining an internal affairs complaint regarding a chokehold that cuts off the circulation or air path of somebody, failing to intervene in case of extreme misconduct, and committing perjury, including a false police report. Last but not least is Bill number 5993, also known as the Rashard K. Gore Justice in Policing Act. And for those who are not familiar, Rashard K. Gore is a young man who is a subject of extreme police violence, whereby a Providence police officer was recently convicted of a crime as a result. And in short, this legislation is a almost mirror image of legislation that's passed around the country, places like Colorado and other pieces in Maryland and New York. This legislation came about in response to the murder of George Floyd last summer, and it will be a landmark piece of legislation that will bring in sweeping reforms, such as requiring all police across the state to wear body-worn cameras. Beginning to peel back the practice of qualified immunity, opening the door for personal liability if somebody's act is so egregious, and making it a crime for failing to intervene in a situation of that sort. And finally, outlining specific acts like kicking somebody in the head, if you're a police officer, and driving a car at people, using it as a weapon, and make these acts felonies. As the point that I was making earlier, I believe that we who are in charge of the public trust, whether we be elected officials, as the folks in this room, or police officers, as it may be, we have to be held to a higher standard. And these bills will not solve everything, but it will go a long way towards beginning to reorient the relationship that is so badly and severely broken between the community and the police. And so I appreciate all your time, not just in listening to me now, but in everything we've heard today and this session and this year. And if anybody has any questions, I will gladly take them.
Any questions for the sponsor? Yes, Camille.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Batista. With regards to House Bill 6104, and you mentioned several instances if the officer was found guilty of certain crimes, he or she would lose their certification. Does that also include domestic violence?
I don't think it's one of the, I don't think it's specifically delineated in there. I'd be happy to add it. There are instances of domestic violence that can become a felony, and so if he commits a felony, they'll be decertified. But I don't know that it specifically says that. An officer may be decertified if they commit a misdemeanor. And so domestic violence is not specifically delineated, but if they commit any sort of crime, they can be decertified.
But if he or she is found guilty of domestic violence as a felony, they would fall within that category of losing the certification, correct?
If it's a felony, they must be decertified. If it's a misdemeanor, they may be decertified.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
I like your hat, by the way.
Any other questions of the sponsor? Thank you, Representative Batista. We can go to the phone calls now. Is that Vin Regasta? We could take him right now.
Okay.
Be decertified. If it's a misdemeanor, they may be decertified.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
I like your hat, by the way.
Hey, Vin.
Any other questions of the sponsor? Yes.
You got to turn down the volume on your computer.
It is down.
There you go. Vin, Bob Craven, how are you?
Good, Bob. Great to see you virtually.
Thanks. You've got, take what time you need to. You're one of the star witnesses of these bills, so proceed with your testimony.
All right. Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here and speak in support of 6152, a bill that I had a hand in drafting. My background, as some of you may know, I've practiced law for nearly 42 years with a focus on labor and employment litigation. And I have represented most of the law enforcement agencies in Leopold matters, including the Rhode Island State Police and many municipalities. I actually started prosecuting Leopold cases when it was only 3 years old. At the risk of being redundant, I will just emphasize a couple of points and then entertain any questions. As you may know, Leopold really is a supersized form of due process, far more than what the United States Supreme Court requires. It really had its genesis at a point in time when there was a perception that law enforcement officers' rights, particularly with respect to employment, was not being observed. What's evolved over the years is this very complex statutory scheme, which, as I argued to the Rhode Island Supreme Court a couple of years ago, is really a mind trap in terms of its procedural requirements. What this bill does, refreshingly so, is it rebalances and reforms the Leopold process while at the same time preserving critical due process rights of law enforcement officers. In essence, it shifts the paradigm by its name alone.
And it also should be noted that it is, in essence, an employment disciplinary statute. So with that backdrop, I will just highlight a couple of points that I think are very helpful in holding police officers accountable if they transgress rules and regulations. The first highlight of the bill, obviously, is the addition of 3 citizen neutrals to the hearing committee panel. That injects a great deal of impartiality and objectivity into the hearing process, and we'll get some sound judgment from ordinary people that we can entrust decision-making to. The second highlight of the bill is the elimination of the so-called no public statement rule in Section 2. That is something that's long overdue. In 1995, the Rhode Island Supreme Court, in Re Sabetta, had questioned its constitutionality. So this modifies the rigidity of that rule and does offer some opportunity to comment with certain procedural safeguards in the bill. Also, 2 other quick points. Loudermill is actually preserved. Loudermill is the procedural due process rights of employees as enunciated by the U.S. Supreme Court. That's in Section 4. It converts Leobor essentially to an appeal process rather than an obstacle for swift and appropriate discipline. Most importantly, from an employment law and a labor law standard, it adopts the doctrine of deference. That doctrine is well known in labor law, and it essentially requires an adjudicator, typically an arbitrator in an employment disciplinary case, to defer to the judgment of the department head or the agency. And of course, it could be overturned or modified if it's deemed to be arbitrary or discriminatory. Last but not least, adding the 30 days to the ability of a chief to punish is, in my judgment, an important consideration because, first and foremost, you should never suspend an employee for a minor violation. That's just antithetical in labor relations. 30 days is a tool, it gives flexibility, and it's consistent with the critical doctrine of progressive discipline. So, that's a concise explanation of the highlights. I'm happy to entertain any questions and share with you any experiences I've had that might be informative.
Any questions of Attorney Ragasta? I think you answered all the questions, Vin.
Okay, Bob. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Be good.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Yes. Hello, you're welcome to the House Committee on Judiciary. You're on the air. You have a minute and a half to testify.
All right. Good evening. My name is Tyson Ferrara, and I've been released April 8th of last year. So I've been home a year and a couple of days, and day by day I live with the fear of being incarcerated and everything I worked for this whole past year to be taken away. I'm guilty by association of being gang affiliated, guilty by association of being an ex-felon, and I live in the inner city where you could be a mistaken identity or be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And losing 10 days out of my life for maybe a minor infraction, I could lose my home, I could lose my family, I could lose my job, I could lose everything. And it would be very worth changing the bill at hand.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Next witness, please. Hello, welcome to the House Committee on Judiciary. You're on the air. You have a minute and a half to testify.
All right. In the early 90s, I was raided, and with this bill, with the house, the stuff that they found, there were 7 people in the house. They arrested everyone. The cops that were involved in the arrests were ended up suspended and fired for bringing up false charges on people. I had to go to prison because I was on probation, and they handed me a 32F, presented me as a violator, and it was for a drug charge, and it wasn't a violent crime. And they said, you know, you got to do the 10 days, the 10 calendar days, weekdays, or the 14, weekends, 14 days with weekends. And someone ended up pleading to the charge. So I went, and I was presented as a violator. I was on TV. I had to be held in prison, and someone pleaded to the charges before the cops were fired from Middletown for making false arrests. So, I mean, I went to prison for nothing because of this bill, because of being held as a violator.
Okay, you have, if you finish with your testimony, that's fine. Otherwise, you could finish up in 15 seconds.
With being able to give people bail and not present them as a violator, they have the opportunity to prove their innocence. It's easier to prove it from the streets, walking into the court from the streets, than it is in handcuffs from the prison.
You said a mouthful. You're correct. Thank you. Next
Thank you.
Please. Sure. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, welcome to the House Committee on Judiciary. You're on the air. You have 1 minute and 15 seconds.
Okay. Basically, from my personal experience about probation and parole is whenever I've had any interaction with law enforcement, whether it's getting pulled over or just approached by a cop, the first question they would ask is if I'm on probation or parole, because everyone knows the moment the answer to that question is yes, and once the handcuffs are on you, whether you're in the right or wrong, you will be incarcerated for an undetermined amount of time on violation alone. And you will serve that time regardless if the initial charge that got you to that courtroom, to that jail cell, gets dismissed. So, realistically, at this point, when I hear a suspended sentence or probation, I just know I'm being set up for failure. You know what I mean?
I do.
And I know so many people that have gone through this, that have chosen to evade the police, to just not be in that situation at all. It's just a simple pullover can really change your life.
Well, I appreciate your testimony, and your words reflect the reality that many of us on this committee know, and we'll certainly keep your thoughts in mind as we consider these bills.
Yeah, I know it's kind of late, and I know a couple people wanted to also have their testimonies heard, but, I try to convey as much as best I could.
Well, listen, on this committee, we have a few members who have been in the courtroom and seen this process in action, so we don't know what it is I don't know what it is to go to intake and have to sit there waiting, wondering what the hell's going to happen next. But I've seen it happen hundreds of times, maybe even thousands to people. And we are going to fix this problem one way or the other. As long as I'm here, we're going to push that rock up that hill. Thank you for your testimony.
Yes, you know, it's innocent till proven guilty, and that's all we wanted.
I hear you. Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Next witness, please. Hello, you're on with the Judiciary Committee. Please give us your name, and you have a minute and 30 seconds to give us your testimony, please.
Thank you. Thank you, committee members, for this opportunity. My name is Margaret Chung, and I'm testifying in support of House Bill 6148. I'm an attorney, and I have 9 years of experience as an assistant public defender for the state of Rhode Island. Approximately 4 years at that time was spent solely on probation violations. I've also participated in the drafting of this bill as well. In practice, the majority of people presented as probation violators are held without bail for a hearing. This being common knowledge in the court system, so knowing that many people who come before the court as alleged violators are offered plea deals to resolve both the new charge as well as the probation violation. These offers to resolve are generally from the AG's office. There are several issues with this. There's no real opportunity to engage in any type of discussion back and forth. Particularly in district court, the AGs are not present in the courtroom. There's virtually no time at all to do any investigation or for an attorney to speak with any witnesses. At best, an attorney may have just a few minutes to do this. Oftentimes, the person feels under pressure to take this deal, especially if it involves no jail time. Usually, this is because they have a job that they can't afford to lose. They may be a single parent with no one else to care for their child. I've seen this scenario many, many times. If a person doesn't accept an offer to resolve anything, to resolve everything, there's a very high chance that they'll be held for 2 weeks until their hearing. This is primarily in district court. Usually in superior court, it goes beyond that. The thing is, there's no definitive research demonstrating that holding alleged probation violators in jail has any impact on recidivism. So why is it that if it doesn't help decrease recidivism or increase public safety, why are people held without bail as alleged violators so frequently?
Maggie,
Yes.
your time is up. This is Jason Knight, so hi.
Hi, Representative Knight.
Good to hear from you. We thank you for your testimony. Do you want to just take 15 seconds to wrap it up?
Sure. Thank you. So it's an enormous burden for someone to be displaced for 2 weeks, only to potentially be released at some point to pick up the pieces of their life. 2 weeks carries long-lasting consequences that go far beyond the punishment, and the focus should be on appropriate bail, not to simply just be held without bail.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness, please. Hello, you're on with the Judiciary Committee. Please give us your name and what bill you want to testify on, and just keep it to a minute and 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, good evening. I'm on the bill that is going to be brought up to on the probation. My name is Douglas Rogers.
All right, Mr. Rogers, go ahead. We got you.
Okay. Regards to the bill and the probation, I feel that there is a need to revise that probation because there's individuals that are being violated for nonviolent crimes, and they're being placed in the intake for nonviolent crimes, and they also are being sentenced up to a year in prison. So it is my hope that we can revise this bill and make it where nonviolent criminals will be released on personal recognizance.
Okay. We got the point. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for your testimony.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Can we have the next caller, please? Hello, you're on with the House Judiciary Committee. Please Give us your name and what bill you're testifying on, and then give us your testimony. You have about a minute and a half to do it.
Great. Hi, my name is Bruce Riley. I'm testifying in support of HB 6148. I'm almost halfway through a 25-year Rhode Island probation sentence. And in the early 1990s, the peak of mass incarceration, I learned in detail that there's two criminal legal systems. One's rooted in a system of equal protection and fundamental fairness and due process, and it's outlined in Article 1, Section 9 around bail, where it says that all persons imprisoned ought to be bailed by sufficient surety, with just a few narrow exceptions for serious crimes, clear evidence. The other system, the one I learned to understand while serving as a jailhouse lawyer at the ACI, is based on a presumption of guilt. I was the person people trusted while awaiting trial and when filing appeals, and the other system applies to thousands of people on probation or parole, and I found it's about half the people at intake awaiting trial. Keeping in mind that probation is an alternative to confinement and is often part of a young person's "you can go home today" by signing this deal for probation, and yet once arrested again, they face mandatory denials of bail, no matter how petty or outlandish the accusation. The violation holds standard operating procedure and leverage in the next case with reduced standards of guilt and practically no evidentiary protections. None of this is told to people before pleading to probation. I watch people lose jobs, relationships, and kids while trying to get back out to their lives. People who are clearly wrongfully accused, others charged with another petty offense, and many others struggling with their mental illness or addiction issues, yet causing little harm to others. Many people are hanging by an economic thread, and who among us can spend a few weeks at the ACI under presumption of guilt? The legislature built our criminal court system over several centuries, including positive reforms in 2017, and this bill would take away the mandatory 10-day probation hold upon arrest, except for limited circumstances. Nothing in the bill prevents the court from holding someone without bail based on a serious risk, a flight risk presented by the new charges. And this is your system now on your watch. I encourage you to not build a system based on efficiency over justice, and please restore the presumption of innocence. Please pass 6148. Thank you.
Mr. Riley, from your lips to God's ears, you speak the truth, and we certainly appreciate your testimony and your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
We have the next caller, please. Hello, you're on with the House Judiciary Committee. Can you give us your name, the bill you're going to testify on, and your testimony? You got about a minute and a half for your testimony.
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Miranda Grundy. I'm a Providence resident and a lifelong Rhode Islander, and I'm testifying in support of H6148. I currently work as someone who's in the field of reentry support services, so helping people upon their release from the ACI, and I've really come to see what kind of impact that has to be dealing with a criminal record and also added probation time, because a criminal record alone makes it finding a job and finding housing extremely difficult within our state. So this extension of a kind of threat over your head, hanging over your head all the time. I've seen people go through the very best transitional programs that our state has to offer and still get picked up on a small thing again. So whatever kind of stability people are achieving, it just remains so fragile, and that's just my perspective of it through this work. But it's also such a racial justice issue within our community. We know that low-income, black, brown, immigrant communities within our state are facing the brunt of this, and the least we can do is allow for the bail or personal recognizance to be granted, because that 10 days of jail time, the added pressure to take a plea deal, it means people lose their jobs, they lose familial ties, some even lose their housing and risk unjust charges that lengthen their criminal records. It's setback severe enough to make someone, give up on their reentry process entirely, and it's just really, it's a simple matter of compassion. It's a reform that makes sense. It's a racial justice issue. It's something that wouldn't impact public safety negatively at all. It's just a common sense reform, and it would help so many thousands of Rhode Islanders. So
thank you for
it's beyond due.
Thank you for your perspective. It is indeed a common sense reform, and we appreciate your testimony.
Thanks.
Can we have the next witness, please? Hello, you're on with the House Judiciary Committee. What's your name?
My name is Valerie Vincent.
All right. Valerie?
Yes.
All right. You have about a minute and a half to give us your testimony. You're calling on Bill 6148?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Valerie Vincent. I'm a pharmacist with CVS. I never thought I'd ever be on probation, but here I am. Being on probation has been eye-opening and very unsettling. Eye-opening because it showed me a different part of the world that I'd never seen. Jail, probation, police officers, correctional officers, the justice system as a whole, and it's unsettling because there are so many things wrong. This current issue being one of them. When I was in jail, I met all sorts of women, and some of them it was their second, third, fourth, fifth time being back there, and it's sad because why are we not helping them get back into society? It's like their lives matter too, you know? And when you're in jail, it takes one look from one CO to make you feel that you are beneath human. They don't have to ever say anything, you just feel it. I felt it. What does that do to a person? You know, the only reason I'm doing well right now is because I have support. My parents have been right beside me through and through. My family and friends never gave up on me, especially when you know I was close to like losing my grip. Instead, they grabbed on and held on to me. Those women that have been back there multiple times most likely do not have the same support that I have. Without my family, I don't know if I'd be able to keep up with all those fees. It took me a while to get here to where I am now. It took me a while to get the job that I have now. It took me a while to get into this mindset that I have now.
Valerie, can you take about 10 seconds to wrap that up?
Yep, I know it's hard, but so how are we supposed to get back on track when we have all these hurdles, you know, like the law being so powerful and daunting, and we're just people that have been incarcerated? This bill, it could be the difference in someone's life between someone and their loved ones, their kids, their work, their family, and themselves. We all need a chance. This bill could be someone's chance.
Thank you, Valerie, for sharing your honest perspective and your point of view. The committee certainly appreciates it, and we thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Can we have the next witness, please? Hello, you're on with the House Judiciary Committee. What's your name?
Hello, this is Nick Horton.
Hey, Nick, it's Representative Knight. Are you testifying on 6148?
I am.
Go ahead. You have about a minute and a half.
All right, we'll be fast. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee. I am the Executive Director of Open Doors, and I want to testify in favor of this legislation as a continuation of the work that we did over the past 12 years that culminated in a piece of legislation sponsored by Representative Siegel in 2010 called the Probation and Innocence Bill, which focused on the overuse of holding people on probation violations in cases where they had not yet been convicted. This legislation, the first of its kind in the country, was very important. However, it clearly did not solve the problem, and the legislation before you is a very necessary next step. One of the cases that was featured in a press conference on that legislation, I think, continues to hold a lot of merit or relevance for the bill before you today, and that was the story of Louise Monroe and her daughter Melanie. Melanie was a victim of domestic violence who had been accused 9 times falsely, and because she was on probation, those accusations frequently resulted in her being held without bail because of Rhode Island's probation laws. In 2008, she spent over 2 months in jail as a probation violator for a charge of disorderly conduct because she was held without bail, ultimately for charges that were later dismissed or that she was acquitted of. Stories like this.
About
Yes.
15 seconds, please.
That's it. Thank you very much.
Nick, thank you for your testimony. We've heard so many stories like that tonight, and as you know, we'll keep plugging away at this issue. Thank you for your time.
Great, thanks.
All right, is that it for 6148? And no more witnesses at all? Or just on these? 6148, okay. Do we have anyone calling on, who do we have?
We've got 6145, Representative Felix, Bill.
Right, we haven't put that into play yet, have we? Right.
Yeah, so.
Any left on Rep. Batista's bills of 6104 or 5993? All right. That concludes the hearing on 6148, 6104, and 5993 by Rep. Batista. And we're going to move on to, I'm going to do this one real quick. Bill 6174 by Chair McNamara. This is an act relating to criminal procedure, the DNA Defender Advocates Program. It would establish a volunteer DNA Defender Advocates Program for law school, for law students. More specifically, it would establish a program to leverage the power of law students with supervision by practicing attorneys to help people expunge and seal their records through the state's DNA databases, if I understand it correctly. I believe we may have one witness on this. He might be sleeping. I told him to turn on a West Coast baseball game. All right. All right. Without further ado, I believe we have Mike DeLauro from the Public Defender's Office on Bill 6174. Is that you, Mike?
Yeah, it sure is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee members, for hanging in there, doing the people's business in such a responsible way. I'm here to talk about Bill number 6174. This is legislation that essentially would create a, I would call it a Innocence project, combining the Public Defender, the Rhode Island Bar Association, and the Roger Williams Law School. I had a long conversation yesterday with the sponsor, Chairman McNamara. I thanked him for the fact that he thought of including the public defender in this effort, recognizing that we've been involved in DNA work for a long time. One of the first post-conviction DNA testing laws was passed in 2002, I believe. It's a piece of legislation that we submitted, and we've been active in this. The problem with this legislation as we see it, and I voiced these concerns to Chairman McNamara, is the issue of resources. As you know, the public defender does a lot with very little. Our caseloads exceed any reasonable standard for providing competent representation, and adding more cases to what we do is not something that we can support at this time. So again, while we appreciate the thoughtfulness of the legislation, it's not something that we can support at this time for the reasons that I've said, essentially resources.
Okay.
With that, be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have at this late hour.
Does anyone have any questions for Mike at this late hour? No, Mike, we appreciate that. It appears to be a first swing at the issue. I think it could go somewhere, and keep at it with Chair McNamara. That'd be great.
Yeah, I told the chair, just so everybody knows, I told the chairman I'm happy to meet with you, and he welcomed that. He indicated to me that he knew where to find me, and I knew where to find him, and that we would continue talking about this.
All right, hang on a minute. Rep. Batista has a question.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Representative Batista, how are you?
I never want to miss an opportunity to say hello.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Rep. Batista, and it's good to see you tonight up there at the plate taking some cuts at these fast pitches are being thrown.
Good to see you, Mike.
All right.
You too, Rep.
Okay. Thank you, Mike, for your testimony. That would conclude our hearing on 6174. We're going to return real quick to 5993, the Rashad K. Gore Justice and Policing Act of 2021. We missed one witness. Hello, you're on with Judiciary. Go ahead and turn your computer down. Tell us your name and give us about a minute and a half of your testimony on 5993.
Absolutely. I'm actually calling on 5993 and 6104. My name is Eugene Montero, and I am obviously a resident of Rhode Island, a disabled veteran, and sadly a victim of police use of force abuse. I'm a nationally certified trainer of many areas in use of force, including handcuffing, baton, pepper spray, and the taser. I'm also the former investigator for the Providence External Review Authority, which is the state's only police oversight board. When we look at what is going on around the state and around the country, as a person of color, a father, and a grandparent, to be honest, I'm very terrified. Sadly, Rhode Island is no different than what's happening across the country, but Rhode Island has been very lucky that incidents have not resulted in the death of two people. When you look at the namesake of this bill, for 5993, Mr. Rashad Gore, and make comparisons to the George Floyd incident, there are many similarities, and I am grateful that we did not have the same result. This bill addresses clear guidance, and gives clear guidance to the important areas in law enforcement and also codified areas that are either vague or non-existent in current police department policies.
Can you your time is up. Can you take about 15 seconds to wrap that up, and then I know Rep. Batista has a question for you.
Sure. Well, I guess the biggest part of the bill that I really want to speak on is the part where it talks about duty to intervene. The duty to intervene is a rule which not only protects the community, but protects the great men and women who choose to wear the uniform. I've had personal conversations with people in law enforcement who don't feel safe that they will be protected if they spoke against situations that they see every day. By putting this bill into law, it would not only protect my family and friends in the community, but also those in uniform.
Thank you. Rep. Batista.
Hey, Eugene, I just wanted to say thank you for waiting so long and participating tonight, and thank you for your service, not only here, but to this country. You know that I've often called you a unicorn, given how many different qualifications you have, and I appreciate so much what you do and look forward to working with you to make this bill law. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you. If I could just make one last point. There's something called the 9 Principles of Law Enforcement, and it was made back in 1829 by a person by the name of Sir Robert Peel. One of my favorite points is number 2, which says the ability of police to perform the duties is dependent upon public approval, police existence and actions, behaviors, and the ability for police to secure and maintain that public respect. Okay. And to me, that's what these bills do.
All
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for your considered testimony. We appreciate your input for sure. And that really does conclude our testimony on 5993. We have 2 bills left. Last but not least, by the indomitable Rep. Felix, who actually has a train to catch in a few hours. They are Bill 5995, right, or an act relating to criminal procedure, sentencing, and execution. It codifies the factors a court must consider in imposing a sentence on a criminal defendant. And Bill 6145, an act relating to criminal procedure, sentence, and execution. It provides for an earned compliance credit system to be used to reduce sentence duration and help reduce prison overcrowding. In other words, it's a good time for probation and parole, right? Take it away, Rep. Felix.
Thank you so much, Rep. Knight.
So I'll start with 6145. So exactly as explained, this bill would create a earned credit compliance for probation and parole. I'll be short. I have some amendments that needs to be introduced for a sub-A for this bill. The governor has introduced language similar to this bill in Article 13 of the budget, and therefore I'm working with DOC and the governor's office to be able to amend the bill to match that what the governor has proposed. So the changes will be, we'll be moving this language to section 425624, which is the correction department rather than section on parole. It makes clear that the calculation of the credit commences upon a person's completion of all terms of incarceration, and this is based on various Supreme Court decisions relating to incarceration, because the intent isn't to give someone both good time credit while incarcerated and compliance credits as well. It exempts certain offenses like murders and sexual assault from earning the credits. It removes the requirement of specific date as to when DOC awards the credits, maintains the Rule 35C requirement, because according to data, someone who spends 1 to 3 years in probation actually has a reduced recidivism of about 82%. So we want to make sure to encourage folks to reduce recidivism and be in compliance. The two sections additionally that will be amended are removing language that probation will provide the termination date on a quarterly basis. Because of the fluidity of sentencing, we don't want to give folks wrong information in terms of doing the calculation. So we want to make sure that the court is the one giving that information. And then finally, the last change is that it grants the court the discretion to remove credits earned if probation or parole is violated. So I know that the DOC has provided a letter of support, and with that concludes the testimony for this bill.
I appreciate that. I want to make one point, because you said something I think that's really important in your testimony. You said if somebody can make it on probation for a period of time, between 1 and 3 years, you know, they have 82%, they have a very small chance of recidivism on the other side of that. Is that correct? Yes. So, one of the reasons why we've gotten away from those extended probationary periods, like our caller before who's on a 25-year probation sentence, is that we've discovered, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong, we've discovered that beyond 3 years or so, there's a point of diminishing returns. There's no reason to keep people on probation. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the sponsor? No? On this particular bill, 5995, do we have any witnesses? Wow. Okay. Put them on. Randall, you on? Randall, you're on with the House Judiciary Committee. We're on our last couple of bills. We're calling you on 5995, but I understand you wanted to say a couple things on some others. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm sorry. I did sign up for more bills, and I guess I was lost in the shuffle, even though I got a voicemail this afternoon that I would be testifying on the other bills as well. I do want to speak on Rep. Batista's 5993 and 6104, as well as Representative Felix's 5995, if that's okay.
It is okay if you can really try to be succinct.
I will not be too long. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. So yes, I would. I am also. So I am very much in favor of Representative Batista's two bills, 5993 and 6104. I want to suggest a slight change on 6104, which is the new bill for the Commission on Standards and Training, and there's an inconsistency in the legal language. It's the existing chapter of Rhode Island law. It talks about a Commission on Standards and Training. And unfortunately, the bill does not. The bill uses a different name for it and doesn't change all the uses of the old name. So there's a legal inconsistency there. It calls it the Police Officer Standards and Accreditation Commission in some places, but leaves the old name Commission on Standards and Training. And obviously, that should be changed. But I do support the overall message of I do support the actual provisions of the bill.
Okay. And how about 5993?
5993. I've been reading through the written testimony in opposition to this bill. This is a bill that prohibits chokeholds and a lot of the unnecessary use of deadly force has been so much of a scandal repeatedly over and over across the country. I looked at the testimony against it, and one thing I keep seeing in the testimony against it is if this bill was passed, officers would have to second guess themselves. Officers would have to, and yes, that is exactly what this bill is trying to do. This is something that's very much needed. It says officers should be a little more careful than some officers are currently used to being in the most important and most crucial situations. And I understand there's resistance to having to second guess their current habits or impulses, but which they feel may be working well, but it's not working well for society. And this bill tells them, think twice about this. Maybe reconsider your approach to these things if you're using things like chokeholds that can kill somebody, or violent or deadly force on a minor offense when there's no danger to the public. I think that what this bill says is yes, you should second guess yourself if you're going too far. You should second guess your training if your training fails to cover one particular situation. And passing this bill would encourage better training and training that would keep the police officer safe, because there's the training is designed to keep the police officer safe. It would keep the police officer safe and the public, but make sure that these standards of respect for human life, the life of innocent people, are being followed. So for those reasons, I support the bill, and and I think it. So I do support the bill. It has a lot of very good measures for protecting people's constitutional rights, and there are some minor. Some minor edits, I would suggest, but I'm not going to waste time on that now.
And how about 6145? Not 6145.
5995. Representative Felix says 5995. Yes. Again, I'm in that one. I'm actually against that one. It looks good on the surface. It's establishing. It spells out specific standards for what you judges to use when using their deciding how much of a sentence to give to people. But one thing that's becoming more and more clear is that certain groups of people tend to be subject to harsher sentences. I'm thinking particularly of transgender people, also some people of color. And I think in this day and age, if we're going to go through the effort of putting something into the law code about what the standard should be, we shouldn't put in standards that sound good on paper making sure that they are not used in a way that unfairly discriminates against transgender people, for instance, which is how they would end up being used in practice. So I think in this day and age, if you want to set more explicit standards or more specific standards, there needs to be some language put in there to make sure that that judges are made more aware of when their decisions become unduly hard, when the decisions of the judiciary tend to have a pattern that's harsher towards transgender people, for instance, and encourages judges to take a second thought about what they're doing in those situations. I understand that in the end it's up to the judge's discretion, but if we're codifying things, it should be, these are among the issues that absolutely need to be included, and I think especially in 2021 we should be aware of that. So for those reasons I oppose the bill as it stands.
Thank you, Randall. We appreciate it. Thank you for your testimony. Okay. Just a little housekeeping and cleanup. I think Randall had veered into 5995, which we really haven't talked about. But this is the last bill of the evening. You want to give us the overview on that, Rep. Felix?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So basically this bill, what it would do is that, as Randall was mentioning, it would give permissible sentencing standards per the case State v. Tiernan, which is a case that was heard, that is from Rhode Island. And basically these are factors that the judge will consider in terms of making sentences and reducing sentences. Basically, the goal is not to allow the judges to discriminate, but rather give them more information and discretion for them to look at different aspects of a person's case and their lives in order to make sure that the case the sentencing, is appropriate, such as the severity of the crime, the potential for rehabilitation, and so on. One thing that this bill is missing, which a sub-A will be needing, is that the goal was also to include immigration status as one of the considerations. So based on a landmark case of Padilla versus Kentucky, defendants must be informed under the Sixth Amendment whether or not a sentence carries risk of deportation. What a lot of states are doing is that they're actually having the judges give the defendants that information in order for them to make an informed decision about the case. Because when you don't, what ends up happening is that the person can actually have their sentences and then retried. So it doesn't give finality to a case when you don't allow someone the opportunity, to give them all the information regarding sentencing. It's just in a fair criminal justice system, not only the judges but the defendants will have full access to the information. And just to clarify again, Randall's point, the purpose is not to just simply allow a judge to discriminate, but to have those factors in consideration when making sentences to ensure that the sentences are appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's absolutely important to say that the blue language in this bill is taken directly out of State versus Tiernan. Those are the sentencing factors that are used every day. We would codify them into law with this bill, and with the sub-A, we would direct the courts that they have to take into account someone's immigration status one way or the other when they are sentencing people, because sometimes a day will make all the difference between, a short probationary period and deportation.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Rep. Felix, for bringing that bill. I think it's super important. Does anyone have any questions on that bill? Hearing none. And we don't have any callers. Is that correct? Yeah. All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Well, let me close out the bill. So with that, we're going to close out the hearing on 5995 and 6145. There are no more bills.
Motion to adjourn.
And all in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.